Part 1. The Trout. In Chapter 1, Malcolm Polstead, an 11-year-old boy with an inquisitive nature, helps run his family's inn, The Trout, on the Thames River near Oxford. The inn serves locals, scholars, and occasional high-profile guests. Malcolm often aids the nuns across the river at Godstow Priory, running errands and ferrying parcels. One winter night, 3 distinguished men, including a former Lord Chancellor, arrive at the inn and question Malcolm about the Priory's activities, especially concerning the possibility of the nuns caring for a baby. The visit leaves Malcolm curious and uneasy, prompting him to plan to inform the nuns of the inquiries. In Chapter 2, Malcolm learns that Lord Nugent, a former Lord Chancellor, secretly leads a resistance group opposing the authoritarian religious authorities. Meanwhile, Malcolm encounters a mysterious man on the canal who drops a carved wooden acorn, which Malcolm retrieves. Inside the acorn is a cryptic note referencing scientific research on dust and a Rusakov field. Later, CCD agents, the church's enforcers, visit the Trout, seeking information about another man linked to Lord Nugent. Tension rises when a bar regular, George Boatwright, defies the CCD, but their demons overpower him, asserting the agent's dominance. Malcolm keeps the acorn hidden, sensing its importance. In Chapter 3, Malcolm learns that Lord Asriel's 6-month-old daughter, Lyra, is secretly being cared for by the nuns at Godstow Priory after Asriel lost his fortune defending her in a duel. While the baby's presence is meant to be a secret, rumors spread, and Malcolm visits the Priory, where Sister Fenella confirms the story and shows him Lyra. Malcolm is captivated by the baby and her demon. Meanwhile, Malcolm discovers that Robert Luckhurst, the man arrested by CCD agents, was found dead, supposedly from an accidental drowning, deepening the mystery surrounding the acorn's message and the CCD's activities. In Chapter 4, Coram van Texel visits the University of Uppsala to investigate Mrs. Coulter's activities. Professors Hallgrimsson and Lofgren reveal that Mrs. Coulter had recently consulted them about the Rusakov field, human consciousness, and her daughter Lyra, who is under court custody and the subject of a witch's prophecy. Mrs. Coulter also sought help locating Lyra using the alethiometer, but was unsuccessful. Coram, being followed since Novgorod by a mysterious man with a hyena demon, confronts and injures them during an ambush but fails to capture them. He writes to Lord Nugent, reporting the events and Coulter's possible ties to the CCD. In Chapter 5, Dr. Hannah Relf, a scholar at Oxford, works secretly for Oakley Street, using the alethiometer to interpret critical questions. Concerned about the missing acorn carrying coded messages, she discovers that Malcolm Polstead, a curious and intelligent boy from the Trout Inn, possesses it. Hannah gains Malcolm's trust, retrieves the acorn, and learns how he came to possess it after the death of Robert Luckhurst. To maintain communication, she creates a cover story, lending him books and encouraging his visits. This arrangement allows them to discreetly exchange information while deepening their connection to the unfolding mystery. In Chapter 6, Malcolm tells his parents about Dr. Hannah Relf's books to maintain a cover for their secret exchanges. At the Trout, Malcolm observes tension as Alice confronts inappropriate behavior, while patrons discuss rising floodwaters. At school, he learns from a friend about the canal man's inquest, revealing he was murdered. Malcolm later visits the Priory and notices heightened security, including heavy shutters, hinting at fear of a threat, possibly related to Lyra. At Hannah's, Malcolm shares his observations, including the Priory's unease. Later, Hannah confides in Professor Papadimitriou about Malcolm, who supports using him discreetly while ensuring his safety. In Chapter 7, Dr. Hannah Relf meets with Oakley Street cataloger Harry Dibdin, to report the murder of her insulator, Mr. Luckhurst, and the compromised communication system. Dibdin advises her to wait for new left luggage boxes to be established. Hannah probes Dibdin about Lord Nugent and Lyra, but learns little. Meanwhile, Malcolm helps Mr. Taphouse install heavy shutters at the Priory, sensing increased security concerns. He visits Lyra, offering her a wooden toy he crafted, but is interrupted by a stern woman in a uniform who dismisses him and criticizes the gift. Malcolm observes growing tension at the Priory, noting Sister Fenella's fear and Lyra's distress. In Chapter 8, Malcolm learns from Eric that the murdered man in the canal might have been a spy, though the claim is unconfirmed. At school, a visitor named Miss Carmichael introduces the League of St. Alexander, a group encouraging children to report anyone speaking against the church. She tells the story of St. Alexander, a boy who betrayed his family for the church and urges the students to join, offering badges and booklets. Many children, including Eric, eagerly sign up, but Malcolm remains wary and refrains.